A billion-dollar tech company faces bankruptcy when a crucial international contract is mysteriously invalidated, despite having 25 top lawyers working around the clock. While the CEO desperately searches for answers, the company's humble nanny, who cares for his daughter while he works late, quietly observes the chaos. Having overheard a single conversation weeks earlier, she holds the key to saving everything. But when she finally speaks up, her revelation will expose a web of corporate betrayal that reaches the highest levels of power, forcing the CEO to confront not just his business empire's collapse, but the cost of the life he's built. Zasimufadifia Marcus Chen stared at the email on his phone screen, reading the same devastating words for the 7th time in 3 minutes. The contract, worth $2.8 billion and representing 5 years of negotiations with the European consortium, had been declared null and void. Just like that. 25 of the most expensive lawyers in Manhattan were scrambling like ants whose hill had been kicked over, and none of them could explain how this had happened. His hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down on his mahogany desk. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 47th floor, New York City stretched endlessly below him. But for the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt like he was falling from this height, instead of soaring above it. "Mr. Chen?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The legal team is assembled in conference room A." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. At 42, he had built Technova from a garage startup into one of the fastest-growing companies in America. He'd survived the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, and countless smaller disasters. But this felt different. This felt like the end. He walked through the halls of his company, noting how employees quickly looked away when they saw him coming. Word traveled fast in a building like this. They all knew. The stock had already dropped 18% in pre-market trading. Conference room A buzzed with barely contained panic. 25 lawyers in $1,000 suits sat around the massive oval table, their laptops open, phones buzzing constantly. At the head of the table sat Patricia Goldstein, the most feared contract attorney on the East Coast. Her reputation alone cost $3,000 an hour. "Marcus," she said without looking up from her tablet, "we've been through every line of the original contract, every amendment, every clause. The Europeans are claiming breach of an authenticity verification requirement that we supposedly agreed to 18 months ago." "What authenticity verification requirement?" Marcus sank into his chair. "I don't remember agreeing to any such thing." "That's the problem," said James Morrison, another senior partner. "We don't have any record of this requirement, but they're producing documents that show your signature, your company seal, everything. Our handwriting experts are examining the papers now, but what?" Patricia finally looked up. "The documents appear authentic, Marcus. Down to the paper stock, the ink composition, even the way you cross your sevens. If these are forgeries, they're the most sophisticated we've ever seen." Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. "So what you're telling me is that I apparently signed away the ability to fulfill a contract worth nearly $3 billion, and I have no memory of doing it." "That's exactly what we're telling you," said another lawyer, a younger woman whose name Marcus couldn't remember. "And without meeting this authenticity requirement by end of business today, the entire deal collapses." "What is this requirement exactly?" Patricia read from her notes. "All technological specifications must be verified by an independent third party who was present during the original negotiations and can attest to the accuracy of the technical details provided to the European consortium." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's insane. We had dozens of people in those negotiations over the years. Engineers, project managers, translators." "The requirement is very specific," James interrupted. "It must be someone who was present during the initial meeting 18 months ago, who heard the exact technical specifications we promised, and who can verify that what we're delivering matches exactly what was promised." "Our meeting records from that time are incomplete," added the young lawyer. "There was that office renovation, remember? Half our files got damaged in the move." Marcus ran his hands through his hair. He remembered that initial meeting vaguely. It was during the worst period of his divorce from Sarah. He'd been working 20-hour days, barely sleeping, signing documents without reading them carefully. Emma had been just 7 then, confused and crying every night because Mommy wasn't coming home anymore. "We've reached out to everyone we can identify who might have been present," Patricia continued, "but most of the European team has changed positions. Our translator from that meeting died last year in a car accident, and the technical consultant we hired has developed severe dementia." He can't even remember his own name, much less the details of a meeting from 18 months ago. The room fell silent except for the constant buzzing and pinging of phones. Through the conference room's glass walls, Marcus could see employees at their desks, some openly crying, others frantically updating their LinkedIn profiles. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. 16 hours, Patricia said. "The European markets open at 3 a.m. our time. If we can't provide this verification by then, they're pulling out entirely. And given the penalty clauses in the contract, we'll owe them 400 million in damages," Marcus finished. "Which we don't have." "Which we don't have," she confirmed. Marcus stood up abruptly. "I need some air. Keep working. There has to be someone we're missing." He walked out of the conference room and down the hall toward his office, his mind racing through every possible solution. Maybe they could pay the penalty by liquidating assets. Maybe they could find a loophole in the contract language. Maybe... "Daddy!" He stopped short. Standing outside his office was Emma, his 9-year-old daughter still in her school uniform. Beside her stood Maria Santos, the woman who had been taking care of Emma since the divorce. Maria was in her 50s, a soft-spoken woman from El Salvador who spoke English with a gentle accent and had a way of making Emma laugh even on the worst days. "Emma, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level. "Shouldn't you be at home with Maria?" "You missed dinner again," Emma said, her voice small. "And you didn't answer your phone when Maria called." Marcus pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. In his panic, he'd silenced everything. "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy's having a really difficult day at work." Emma studied his face with the unsettling perceptiveness that children sometimes possess. "Are you going to lose your job like Tommy's dad did?" The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. "No, sweetheart. We're just working through some problems." But as he said it, Marcus realized it might not be true. If they couldn't solve this crisis in the next 16 hours, he wouldn't just lose his job. He'd lose everything. The house in the Hamptons, Emma's private school, the life he'd built for her since the divorce. Everything. Maria stepped forward quietly. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you at work. Emma was worried because you didn't come home. And when I called Mrs. Patterson next door, she said she saw on the news that your company's stock was..." "It's okay, Maria. Thank you for bringing her." Marcus stood up, his knees creaking. When had he gotten so old? "Can you take her home? I'll be there as soon as I can." "Of course." Maria's dark eyes showed genuine concern. "Mr. Chen, if there's anything I can do to help." Marcus almost smiled despite everything. Maria was offering to help save a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The woman who cleaned his house and made Emma's lunch every morning was willing to take on Wall Street's finest legal minds. "I appreciate that, Maria. I really do, but it's complicated business stuff. Legal contracts and international law. Unless you happen to remember details from a meeting that happened 18 months ago that somehow proves we met some requirement we apparently agreed to, but don't remember agreeing to." He was rambling now, the stress finally showing. Maria tilted her head slightly, the way she did when Emma was telling her about something confusing that happened at school. "What kind of meeting, Mr. Chen?" Marcus looked at her more closely. There was something in her voice, a careful attention that hadn't been there a moment before. "It was with some Europeans, a big contract negotiation. We were discussing technical specifications for a new software platform. It was during that crazy time when the office was being renovated, and Sarah and I were..." He stopped himself. Maria knew about the divorce, but he didn't need to relive it in front of Emma. "The meeting in the small conference room?" Maria asked quietly. "The one where I brought coffee because the regular service was disrupted during construction." Marcus stared at her. You remember that?" "I remember bringing coffee to a lot of meetings during that time. The construction was very loud, so I had to be extra careful not to disturb important conversations." Something electric shot through Marcus's chest. "Maria, I need you to think very carefully. Do you remember anything about what was said in that meeting? Anything at all about technical specifications or requirements or..." But Maria was already shaking her head. "I don't understand those business words, Mr. Chen. I just brought coffee and tried to be quiet." The momentary hope deflated like a punctured balloon. Of course, Maria wouldn't remember technical specifications. She was a nanny, not a software engineer. "It's okay," he said. "Thank you for trying." He knelt down again to hug Emma goodbye, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. This might be one of the last times he could provide her with the life she'd grown accustomed to. After tomorrow, everything would change. As Maria and Emma walked toward the elevator, Marcus heard his daughter's voice echoing down the hallway. "Is Daddy going to be okay, Maria?" And Maria's soft response, "Your daddy is a good man, Mija. Sometimes good men face difficult times, but they find a way through." Marcus stood there for a long moment, watching the elevator doors close on the two people who mattered most to him in the world. Then he turned back toward the conference room, where 25 lawyers were burning through his company's remaining cash reserves at a rate of several $1,000s per hour, trying to solve the unsolvable. He had 15 hours left to save everything he'd built, 15 hours to find a miracle. As he walked back down the hallway, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just let something important slip through his fingers, but he couldn't identify what. The stress was making him paranoid, making him grasp at straws that weren't there. Behind him, the elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying a frightened little girl and a quiet woman who had heard much more than anyone realized. Fast in Chico Seimas, Marcus returned to conference room A to find the legal team had multiplied, word of the crisis had spread, and now 32 lawyers filled the space, some standing against the walls, others connected via video call from their home offices. The air was thick with desperation and expensive cologne. "Any progress?" he asked, though the grim faces around the table already provided the answer. Patricia looked up from a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "We've identified 12 people who were definitely present during various meetings with the European Consortium. 7 are unreachable, 3 claim they don't remember the specific technical details, and 2 are demanding legal immunity before they'll cooperate." Immunity? For what? They're afraid that anything they say might implicate them in whatever scheme created these mystery documents, explained James Morrison. "Corporate lawyers are paranoid by nature, Marcus. They smell a setup." Marcus slumped into his chair. "What about the Europeans? Can't we just ask them exactly what they need verified?" "We tried," said the young lawyer, whose name he still couldn't remember. Their response was that the authenticity verification requirement is clearly stated in the documentation we signed. They're not obligated to explain our own contract to us. How convenient. Marcus loosened his tie. The walls of the conference room seemed to be closing in. "What about paying the penalty? If we liquidate assets, sell the building, take out emergency loans?" Patricia's expression grew even more grim. "We ran the numbers. Even if we could liquidate everything in time, which we can't, we'd still be about 60 million short. And that's assuming the asset values hold steady, which they won't once word gets out that we're in a fire sale situation." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife, Sarah. "Emma told me about problems at work. Call me when you can." Even Sarah knew. The mother who had walked out claiming he cared more about Technova than his family was now checking on his business troubles. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. "Mr. Chen," a new voice spoke from the back of the room. Marcus turned to see David Kim, one of his junior developers, standing nervously by the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I might have something." The room fell silent. David was barely 25, a brilliant programmer who spent most of his time in the basement working on encryption protocols. What could he possibly know about contract negotiations? "Come in, David. At this point, I'll listen to anyone." David approached the table hesitantly, clutching a laptop. "I've been thinking about this authenticity verification thing. In software development, when we need to verify that code matches original specifications, we use checksums and digital signatures. Maybe whatever they want verified has some kind of technical fingerprint?" Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Well, if they discussed specific technical specifications, server capacities, processing speeds, security protocols, those numbers would be very precise. If I could find our original technical proposal from 18 months ago, I could compare it to what we're actually delivering. Maybe that's all they need." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Do we have those original technical documents?" "That's the problem," David said, opening his laptop. "Most of our files from that period were corrupted during the office move, but I've been running data recovery software all afternoon, and I managed to salvage some fragments." He turned the laptop screen toward the room. Dozens of partially recovered files were listed, most with corrupted names and incomplete data. "This one here," David pointed to a file labeled EU Tech Specs V7 Final Draft. "I can open it, but it's missing huge chunks. Look." The document appeared on the screen, but it looked like Swiss cheese. Whole paragraphs replaced by strings of symbols and error codes. "The processing capacity specifications are here," David continued, "but the security protocol section is completely gone, and there's this weird note at the bottom that doesn't make sense." Marcus leaned forward. At the bottom of the document, In what appeared to be his own handwriting were the words, "M. Santos confirms translation accuracy. Verbal verification sufficient per Article 12. Maria Santos," Marcus said slowly. "Who?" Patricia asked. "My daughter's nanny. But that doesn't make sense. Why would her name be on a technical document?" James Morrison frowned. "Santos is a common name. Maybe it refers to someone else." "But it says M. Santos," Marcus insisted. "And it mentions translation accuracy. Maria is from El Salvador. She speaks Spanish and English. Was there a Spanish translator involved in the negotiations?" Patricia asked. Marcus tried to remember. Those months had been such a blur of meetings, depositions from the divorce, Emma's school events he'd missed. There might have been. The European team included representatives from Spain, I think. David was typing rapidly. "I can try to recover more files, but the data recovery process could take hours, and some of these files might be completely unsalvageable." "Do it," Marcus said. "Everything you can find from that time period." As David left to continue his work, Patricia was already making calls. "I'm having our investigators look into any M. Santos who might have been involved in translation services 18 months ago." Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Central Park was a dark rectangle in the distance, surrounded by the glittering lights of the city that never slept. Somewhere out there in his house on the Upper East Side, Emma was probably doing her homework at the kitchen table, while Maria helped her with math problems. The same Maria who had been in his office less than 2 hours ago, offering to help with his business crisis. The same Maria who had asked specifically about the meeting in the small conference room. "Patricia," he said suddenly, "how specific was this authenticity verification requirement? Did it have to be someone with technical expertise, or just someone who was present?" "Let me check." She rifled through her notes. "It says, verified by an independent third party who was present during the original negotiations and can attest to the accuracy of the technical details provided." It doesn't specify that the person needs to understand the technical details, just that they can confirm the accuracy of what was said. Marcus turned from the window. What if it's not about understanding the technology? What if it's just about confirming that what we promised 18 months ago matches what we're delivering now? But who could do that? We've already established that most of the people present either can't remember or won't cooperate. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Maria's careful way of listening, the way she tilted her head when processing information, the way she could repeat back every detail of Emma's school day, even when she seemed to be focused on cooking dinner. "I need to make a phone call," he said. He stepped out of the conference room and dialed his home number. Maria answered on the second ring. "Chen residence." "Maria, it's Marcus. Is Emma okay?" "She's fine, Mr. Chen. She finished her homework and she's reading in bed. She's worried about you." "I'm worried about me too." Marcus paused. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully. That meeting 18 months ago, the one where you brought coffee, do you remember anything else about it? Anything at all?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Chen, I told you I don't understand business words." "I know, but you understand people. You notice things. You remember things." Marcus was pacing now. "Please, Maria, I know this sounds crazy, but I think you might be the only person who can help us." Another silence. Then, "What kind of help?" "I need to know if you remember what was promised in that meeting. Not the technical words, but the general ideas. Did we promise to build something fast, something secure, something that could handle a lot of users?" "Mr. Chen," Maria's voice was hesitant. "I remember that meeting because it was very strange." Marcus's heart began to race. "Strange how?" "The Spanish man. He was translating for the others, but sometimes his translation was not correct." "What do you mean?" "When you talked about the security features, he told them it would be very secure, but you had said military-grade secure. So when you talked about the processing speed, he said very fast, but you had said it would handle 10,000 concurrent users without lag." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. "You understood all of that?" "I understood you were promising specific things, and he was making them sound less specific. I thought maybe it was normal for business meetings." "Maria, did you write any of this down? Tell anyone about it?" "I mentioned it to Mrs. Patterson the next day when she asked about your meeting. She said I should tell you, but then your divorce papers came and you were so upset, and I didn't want to bother you with something that might not be important." Marcus closed his eyes. "Mrs. Patterson was their elderly neighbor who had passed away 6 months ago. The only other person who might have known was gone. But Maria remembered. Maria had been there, had heard every promise, every specification, every detail that had been mistranslated or misunderstood. She was the witness they needed. "Maria," he said carefully, "how clearly do you remember what we actually promised versus what was translated?" "Very clearly, Mr. Chen. When people say things wrong about important matters, I remember. My grandmother taught me that sometimes the smallest details matter the most." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening after being locked for a very long time. "Maria, I need you to trust me. Can you get a taxi to my office? Bring Emma if you need to. This might save everything." "Mr. Chen, I don't understand." "You will. And Maria, you might just be the smartest person I know." As he hung up the phone and headed back toward the conference room, Marcus realized that for the first time in hours, he had something that had been completely absent since this crisis began. He had hope. 45 minutes later, Marcus stood by the elevator watching the numbers climb. 32, 33, 34. His palms were sweating, and he realized he hadn't felt this nervous since his first job interview 15 years ago. Everything depended on what Maria remembered and whether she could convince a room full of skeptical lawyers that her testimony was credible. The elevator doors opened and Emma ran out first, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them. Behind her, Maria walked more slowly, clutching a small notebook and looking distinctly uncomfortable in her surroundings. "Daddy!" Emma hugged his legs. "Maria said you needed her help with something really important." "I do, sweetheart. The most important thing I've ever needed help with." Marcus knelt down to Emma's level. "But I need you to be very patient while Maria and I talk to some people, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly. At 9, she had learned to read the gravity in adult voices. Marcus led them toward conference room A, his heart pounding. Through the glass walls, he could see the legal team had grown even larger. Word of a potential breakthrough had spread, and lawyers who had been working from home were now arriving in person. "Maria," he said quietly as they approached the room, "these people are going to ask you a lot of questions. Some of them might seem repetitive or confusing. Just tell them exactly what you remember, exactly as you remember it." Maria nodded, but her grip on the notebook tightened. They entered the conference room and conversations immediately died. 35 lawyers in expensive suits turned to stare at a woman in jeans and a simple sweater who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Patricia stood up. "Ms. Santos, I presume?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Patricia Goldstein, lead counsel for Technova. Mr. Chen tells us you may have witnessed the meeting in question 18 months ago." "I brought coffee," Maria said simply. Marcus saw several lawyers exchange glances. He could practically read their thoughts. "This is our miracle witness? A housekeeper who brought coffee?" "Ms. Santos," Patricia continued, "before we proceed, I need to ask, did you sign any confidentiality agreements regarding anything you might have overheard during that meeting?" Maria looked confused. "I don't sign business papers, ma'am. I just work for Mr. Chen's family." "That's actually perfect," said James Morrison. "It means you're not bound by any corporate legal restrictions." Patricia gestured to a chair at the head of the table, usually reserved for Marcus. "Please sit down. We'd like to ask you some questions about what you remember." Maria sat carefully, placing her notebook on the table. Emma climbed into the chair next to her. "First," Patricia began, "can you confirm that you were present during a meeting between Technova representatives and a European business consortium approximately 18 months ago?" "Yes, ma'am. It was in the small conference room because the big one was being painted. And there was a translator present?" "Yes, a Spanish man. He was translating for the people who didn't speak English well." Marcus watched the lawyers lean forward slightly. This was already more specific information than they'd gotten from anyone else. "Ms. Santos, did you understand what was being discussed in this meeting?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "I understood that Mr. Chen was promising to build something for these people, something to do with computers. Did you pay attention to the specific promises being made?" "I didn't mean to listen," Maria said quickly, "but the Spanish man's translation was wrong, and it made me uncomfortable." The room went completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Patricia's voice was carefully controlled. "Wrong how?" Maria opened her notebook. "I wrote some things down later when I got home. I was worried about Mr. Chen making promises that were being translated wrong." She had written it down. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can you read us what you wrote?" Maria adjusted her glasses and began to read in her careful English. "Mr. Chen said the system would have military-grade security with 3-factor authentication and encrypted data transmission. The Spanish man told them it would be very secure with password protection. Several lawyers started talking at once. Patricia held up a hand for silence. Go on. Mr. Chen said the system could handle 10,000 concurrent users with less than 50 milliseconds of lag time. The translation was support many users quickly. Marcus saw David Kim's eyes widen. Those were extremely specific technical specifications, the kind of details that could absolutely be verified. Mr. Chen said there would be automatic backup systems with real-time data replication to 3 separate geographic locations. The translation was good backup systems. Mrs. Santos, James Morrison interrupted. How could you possibly remember such specific technical terms? Maria looked embarrassed. My son Roberto is studying computer engineering at community college. He teaches me things. When I heard Mr. Chen use these words, I recognized them because Roberto uses them too. Marcus stared at her. In 3 years of employment, Maria had never mentioned having a son in college. He realized how little he knew about the woman who had been caring for his daughter. Continue reading, please, Patricia said. Mr. Chen promised 24/7 customer support with response times guaranteed within 4 hours for critical issues. The translation was good customer service. Mr. Chen promised 99.9% uptime with automatic failover systems. The translation was, the system will work well. Maria closed the notebook. There were more things, but these seemed like the most important promises that were not translated correctly. The conference room was so quiet Marcus could hear the air conditioning humming. Patricia was the first to speak. Ms. Santos, why didn't you mention these translation errors to anyone at the time? I started to tell Mr. Chen the next day, but Mrs. Patterson said maybe I shouldn't interfere in business matters. Then Mr. Chen's wife moved out, and Emma was crying every night, and he was working so many hours. Maria's voice trailed off. It seemed like a bad time to worry him with something that might not matter. Marcus felt a stab of guilt so sharp it was almost physical. While he'd been drowning in the chaos of his divorce, Maria had been trying to protect his business interests and his emotional well-being simultaneously. Mrs. Santos, said a lawyer Marcus didn't recognize. These are very specific technical details. Are you certain you remember them accurately? I wrote them down the same day, Maria said firmly. And I checked with Roberto to make sure I understood the computer words correctly. Your son could confirm this? Yes, sir. I called him that night to ask what 3-factor authentication meant because I wanted to be sure I wrote it down right. Patricia was scribbling notes furiously. Ms. Santos, in your opinion, based on what you heard Mr. Chen actually promise, would the system Technova is currently preparing to deliver meet those specifications? Maria looked at Marcus uncertainly. I don't know what you're delivering, Mr. Chen, David Kim spoke up. I can answer that. Based on Ms. Santos's list, we're actually exceeding most of these specifications. Our security is beyond military grade. Our concurrent user capacity is 15,000. Our uptime is 99.95%. So we can verify that we're delivering what was actually promised, Marcus asked. We can verify that we're delivering more than what was actually promised, David confirmed. Patricia stood up abruptly. I need to make some calls. If Ms. Santos is willing to provide sworn testimony about what she witnessed, and if her son can corroborate the timing and accuracy of her notes, we might have exactly what we need. But will the Europeans accept testimony from, one of the younger lawyers began, then stopped himself. From a nanny? Maria finished quietly. You can say it. That's what I am. Marcus felt a surge of anger at his own legal team, but Maria continued speaking before he could respond. I am a nanny, yes, but I am also a person who was present at your meeting, who understood what was promised, and who wrote it down because I was worried about the accuracy of the translation. The paper you signed says you need someone who was there and can verify what was promised. I was there, I can verify. The simple dignity in her voice silenced the room. Emma, who had been quietly coloring in a notebook during most of the conversation, suddenly looked up. Maria remembers everything, Daddy. She remembers what I had for lunch 3 weeks ago, and what book we read last Tuesday, and how many times I brushed my teeth every day since I met her. Marcus smiled at his daughter, but his mind was racing. Patricia, what do we need to do? First, we need to prepare a formal statement of Ms. Santos's testimony. Then we need to contact her son to verify the timeline. Then we need to prepare documentation showing that our current deliverables meet or exceed the specifications she witnessed being promised. How long will that take? Patricia checked her watch. If we work through the night, we can have everything ready by morning. The question is whether the Europeans will accept this type of witness testimony. There's only one way to find out, Marcus said. As the lawyers began mobilizing with renewed energy, Marcus turned to Maria. "Why didn't you ever tell me you had a son?" Maria's smile was sad. "Mr. Chen, you never asked about my life outside your house, and that was okay. I know you have many important things to think about." Marcus realized that while he'd been so focused on building his empire, he'd missed the most important details about the people who made his life possible. Maria had been protecting his business, raising his daughter, and somehow managing to put her own son through college, all while remaining nearly invisible to him. "Maria," he said quietly, "after this is over, I'd very much like to meet Roberto, and I'd like to know more about you if you're willing to share." "I would like that, Mr. Chen." As the legal team worked feverishly around them, Marcus watched his daughter coloring peacefully next to the woman who might just save everything he'd built. For the first time in 18 months, he was beginning to understand what really mattered. And for the first time in hours, he believed they might actually survive this crisis. But dawn was still 6 hours away, and they weren't safe yet. At 11:47 p.m., Technova's office building hummed with activity that should have been impossible at that hour. Every floor was lit up, and the parking garage was fuller than it usually was during business hours. Word had spread through the company's emergency communication channels, all hands on deck to save the contract that would determine whether Technova survived or died. Marcus stood in his office, looking down at the street below, where delivery trucks from 3 different restaurants were unloading food for the overnight workers. His assistant had ordered enough coffee to supply a small army. In conference room A, Maria sat with a court stenographer, providing her formal testimony while Roberto, her 22-year-old son who had driven in from Queens, waited in the adjacent room. Marcus had been stunned when Roberto arrived. The young man was tall, articulate, and spoke with the precise diction of someone studying engineering. He looked nothing like what Marcus had unconsciously expected, and that realization had been another uncomfortable reminder of his own assumptions. "Mr. Chen," David Kim appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet and looking exhausted but energized. "We've got the technical verification complete, Ms. Santos' specifications match our delivery package exactly. Actually, we're exceeding them in 12 different categories." "That's incredible news. How much longer until we can present everything to the Europeans?" "Patricia says another 2 hours for the legal formatting, but there's something else." David hesitated. "I've been digging deeper into those recovered files, and I found something strange." Marcus gestured for him to continue. "The file corruption wasn't random. Someone deliberately overwrote specific sections of our documentation. This wasn't accidental damage from the office move. This was sabotage." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Sabotage? By whom?" "I'm still investigating, but the digital fingerprints suggest it was done from an internal terminal, someone with administrative access to our servers." Marcus sank into his chair. A crisis caused by external market forces was one thing, but deliberate sabotage from within his own company, that changed everything. "Who has administrative access?" 12 people. IT department heads, senior partners, executive assistants, and David checked his tablet. Anyone with C-level clearance. C-level clearance. Marcus's mind raced through the implications. Chief executives, chief technology officers, chief financial officers, people he trusted completely, people who could destroy the company from within if they chose to. "David, I need you to quietly investigate this further. But don't let anyone know what you're looking for, not even Patricia. If someone inside Technova is trying to sabotage us, we need to know who before we give them another chance to strike." David nodded and left. Marcus sat alone in his office, feeling paranoid and exhausted. Outside conference room A, he could see Maria still talking to the stenographer, patiently answering the same questions multiple times to ensure absolute accuracy in the record. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Emma's asleep on the couch in your conference room. She refused to leave Maria, proud of our daughter for being loyal to someone who deserves it." Even his ex-wife was taking subtle shots at his character, but she wasn't wrong. Emma had instinctively understood what Marcus had taken years to recognize. Maria was family, not just an employee. Marcus walked to conference room A and quietly opened the door. Emma was indeed asleep on a small couch that had been brought in, covered with Marcus's suit jacket. Maria was still speaking to the stenographer, but her voice was getting hoarse. "Let's take a break," Marcus said softly. Maria looked up gratefully. The stenographer nodded and stepped outside to get coffee. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked, sitting down across from Maria. "I'm okay, but I keep wondering if I remembered everything correctly." What if I made a mistake? What if Roberto was wrong about the computer words? Marcus leaned forward. Maria, you've already provided more accurate information than 25 lawyers could find in 12 hours. Even if there are small errors, you've given us something solid to work with. But what if it's not enough? It was the same question Marcus had been asking himself all night. What if the Europeans rejected testimony from a nanny? What if they found some other technicality to void the contract? What if the saboteur struck again? Then we'll have tried our best, he said finally, and sometimes that's all anyone can do. Maria studied his face. You're scared. It wasn't a question. Marcus realized that Maria had probably seen him scared many times over the past 3 years, during the divorce, during Emma's emergency appendectomy, during the various business crises that had kept him working late. She'd just never commented on it before. Terrified, he admitted, not just about the business, about what this means for Emma's future, about the people who will lose their jobs if we fail, about, he gestured around the room, about all of this falling apart. Mr. Chen, can I ask you something personal? Marcus nodded. Why did you build all this? Maria gestured toward the windows, encompassing the entire company. What were you trying to create? The question caught him off guard. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that would last, something that would make Emma proud of her father. And have you? Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter, then back at Maria. I thought I had, but tonight I realized that Emma is proud of you, not me. You're the one who's been there for her every day. You're the one who remembers what she had for lunch and helps with her homework and knows when she's worried about something. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Chen, Emma talks about you constantly, about how smart you are, how hard you work, how you're trying to make the world better with your computers. She's very proud of you, but I've missed so much of her life. Yes, you have, but you can't go backward, only forward, and maybe this crisis is happening for a reason. What do you mean? Maria chose her words carefully. Sometimes people have to lose everything to understand what they actually have. Maybe you needed to almost lose your company to realize that your daughter doesn't care about your company. She cares about you. The simplicity of the statement hit him harder than any legal brief or financial report could have. Maria, when this is over, whether we save the company or not, I want to do things differently. I want to be a better father, a better employer, a better person. That's good, Mr. Chen, but don't wait for this to be over. Start now. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Patricia burst into the room holding a stack of papers. We have a problem, she announced. I just got off the phone with the European team. They're rejecting our request for testimony verification. Marcus felt his stomach drop. On what grounds? They're claiming that witness testimony from non-technical personnel is insufficient for technical contract verification. They want testimony from someone with certified technical expertise who was present during the original meeting. But that's impossible. We've already established that no technical experts from that meeting are available or reliable. That's what I told them. Their response was that our inability to meet the verification requirements is our problem, not theirs. Marcus sank into his chair. After all of this, after Maria's courage in coming forward, after Roberto's late-night drive from Queens, after the army of lawyers working through the night, they were back where they started. There has to be something else, he said desperately. Some other angle, some other approach. Patricia was already shaking her head. Marcus, we've exhausted every legal option, unless we can find a certified technical expert who was present at that meeting and can verify the specifications. Wait, said a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Roberto entering the room, holding Maria's notebook and looking thoughtful. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but I've been thinking about something. Mom, you said you called me that night to verify the technical terms you'd written down. Yes, mijo. I wanted to make sure I understood them correctly. And I explained what each term meant, right? We talked for almost an hour about encryption protocols and server architecture and data redundancy. Yes, but I don't understand. Roberto turned to Patricia. Mom, if someone calls a certified technical expert and describes specific technical specifications, and the expert confirms the accuracy and meaning of those specifications, wouldn't that expert be providing technical verification of those requirements? Patricia stared at him. Are you saying you provided technical consultation on these specifications 18 months ago? I'm saying my mother called me, described exactly what she'd heard in that meeting, and I confirmed the technical meaning and accuracy of every specification she'd written down as someone with certified expertise in computer systems architecture. Marcus felt his heart begin to race. Roberto, what kind of certification do you have? I'm CompTIA certified in network security and systems architecture. I'm also Microsoft certified in cloud systems integration. I've been working part-time as a technical consultant while I finish my degree. Patricia's eyes were wide. So you're a certified technical expert who provided verification of the specifications that were discussed in the original meeting. That's exactly what I am, Roberto confirmed. And you can testify to the technical accuracy of what your mother heard and recorded. Absolutely. I can provide detailed technical analysis of every specification she documented. Marcus looked at Maria, who was smiling at her son with obvious pride. Did you know? He asked her. I knew Roberto was smart, she said simply. I didn't know he was exactly what you needed. As Patricia rushed out to make phone calls and Roberto began reviewing his mother's notes, Marcus realized that the miracle they'd been searching for hadn't come from expensive lawyers or corporate databases or emergency meetings. It had come from a family that had been quietly supporting his family for 3 years, asking for nothing in return except the chance to work hard and take care of the people they loved. What happens next is even more intense. And to not miss how this incredible story ends, tap the subscribe button now. It's free and you'll be with me in every new chapter. Saastika. At 4:17 a.m., Patricia returned to conference room A with an expression that Marcus couldn't read. The legal team had been working for 3 straight hours, preparing Roberto's technical verification testimony, and the young man had proven himself to be extraordinarily knowledgeable about the specifications his mother had recorded. The Europeans have agreed to accept Roberto's testimony, Patricia announced, and the room erupted in exhausted cheers. But there's a catch. The celebration died immediately. They want a live video conference in 45 minutes with Roberto providing real-time technical verification. They'll be asking detailed questions about each specification, and they want to see our actual system in operation to confirm we're delivering what was promised. Marcus looked at Roberto, who had been awake for over 20 hours. Are you up for that? Yes, sir. I've reviewed everything my mother documented, and I've spent the last 3 hours examining your actual system architecture with David's team. I can verify that you're exceeding the original specifications in every category. David Kim nodded in agreement. Roberto knows our system better than some of our own engineers at this point. He's incredible. As the team prepared for the video conference, Marcus stepped outside to call Sarah. Emma was still asleep on the conference room couch, and he wanted to let her mother know what was happening. Marcus, Sarah's voice was groggy. It's 4 in the morning. I know, I'm sorry, but I wanted you to know that we might actually pull through this. Maria and Roberto, her son, they're saving the company. Her son? Marcus, do you realize you've never mentioned that Maria has a son? The criticism stung because it was accurate. I know. I've learned a lot about my own blindness tonight. Well, I hope this experience teaches you something about paying attention to the people who actually matter in your life. Before Marcus could respond, his phone began buzzing with another call. The display showed his CFO, Stephen Walsh, calling from what appeared to be an overseas number. Sarah, I need to take this. Stephen's calling from Europe. This might be about the contract. He switched calls. Stephen, please tell me you have good news. Marcus, we need to talk. Privately. Something in Stephen's tone made Marcus's blood run cold. What's wrong? Not over the phone. Can you meet me in your office in 10 minutes? Stephen, you're supposed to be in London. How can you? I flew back overnight. 10 minutes, Marcus. And don't tell anyone I'm here. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. Stephen Walsh had been his CFO for 6 years, one of his most trusted advisors. Why would he fly back from London in secret? Why the cloak and dagger routine? Marcus walked back toward his office, his mind racing. As he passed conference room A, he could see the technical team setting up for the video conference with the Europeans. Roberto was reviewing notes while Maria sat beside him, offering quiet encouragement. His office was dark when he entered, but he could see a figure silhouetted against the windows. Stephen? The man turned, and Marcus saw that his CFO looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. Close the door, Stephen said. Marcus did as requested, then turned on the lights. Stephen looked worse than he'd appeared in silhouette. Unshaven, rumpled, his usually perfect appearance completely disheveled. Stephen, what the hell is going on? How are you here? The contract verification is happening in 30 minutes, and the contract verification doesn't matter, Stephen interrupted. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react. The sick feeling in Marcus's stomach intensified. What are you talking about? Stephen walked to the chair opposite Marcus's desk and sat down heavily. The contract crisis isn't random. It's not bad luck or bureaucratic confusion or translation errors. What do you mean? I mean someone engineered this entire situation. Someone wanted Technova to fail, and they used the European contract as the weapon. Marcus sat down slowly. Stephen, are you telling me that someone deliberately sabotaged our biggest deal? Yes. Who would do that? Who could do that? Stephen was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something Marcus had never seen there before. Shame. Me, Stephen said quietly. I did it. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't process what he'd heard. You... what? I sabotaged the contract. I created the authenticity verification requirement. I corrupted the files that would have proven we'd met our obligations. I've been working with a consortium of Technova's competitors to force the company into bankruptcy so they could acquire our technology and client base for a fraction of what it's worth. Marcus stared at his CFO, his friend, his trusted advisor, the man who had helped him build Technova from a struggling startup into a billion-dollar company. Why? Because they offered me $50 million and a position as CEO of the merged entity. Stephen's voice was flat, emotionless. Because I've been watching you make decisions I disagreed with for 2 years. Because I thought I could run this company better than you. Marcus felt like the floor was disappearing beneath him. The translation errors that Maria documented were real. That was just incompetent translation. But I saw an opportunity to use that confusion to create a contract crisis that would be impossible to resolve. Stephen laughed bitterly. I spent months setting this up. I planted the authenticity verification clause in the contract revisions during your divorce, when you were too distracted to read everything carefully. I made sure the translator's errors weren't corrected in the final documentation. I corrupted our internal files so you couldn't prove what was actually promised. And the European consortium is part of this conspiracy? No. They're legitimate business partners who believe they're dealing with a contract dispute. The conspiracy is entirely on our end. Me and representatives from 3 of our biggest competitors. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The city was beginning to show signs of dawn, early commuters starting their journey to work. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that in this building, a man was confessing to the systematic destruction of everything Marcus had spent 15 years building. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked without turning around. Because I've been watching your team work all night to save something that I destroyed. I've been watching a nanny and her son sacrifice their sleep and their privacy to help a company that's never given them anything but a paycheck. And I realized that the person I've become is not someone I can live with. Marcus turned back to face Stephen. What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Absolution? I want to fix this. I want to help you save the company before it's too late. How? Stephen reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. I have copies of all the original documentation that proves Technova's compliance with the contract terms. I have recordings of conversations with the competitor representatives. I have financial records showing the $50 million payment they've already transferred to my offshore accounts. Marcus stared at the tablet. For you're willing to incriminate yourself? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to undo what I've done. Why? What changed? Stephen was quiet for a moment. 2 hours ago, I called my daughter at college to tell her I might not be able to pay her tuition next semester because of a business crisis. She said, "Dad, don't worry about money. Education is important, but integrity is more important. Whatever you're facing, just make sure you can look at yourself in the mirror afterward." Stephen's voice broke slightly. I realized I haven't been able to look at myself in the mirror for months. Marcus sat back down, his mind reeling. In one conversation, everything had changed. The crisis wasn't about contract technicalities or translation errors or bureaucratic confusion. It was about betrayal by someone he'd trusted completely, but it was also about the possibility of salvation. Stephen, if you help us resolve this, if you provide the evidence we need, you're going to prison. You understand that, right? I understand. But Marcus, there's something else you need to know. The European conference call in 20 minutes? That's not really about contract verification. What do you mean? The competitors I've been working with, they're planning to use that call to introduce additional contract complications that will make it impossible for you to comply, even with Roberto's testimony. They want to drag this out until Technova is forced into bankruptcy proceedings. Marcus felt a surge of rage so intense it surprised him. You're still helping them? No. I'm warning you. I'm telling you that Roberto's testimony by itself won't be enough. You need the evidence I have to completely shut down their sabotage attempt. Marcus looked at the tablet Stephen was offering. Everything he needed to save his company was right there. But accepting it meant trusting the man who had just confessed to trying to destroy everything Marcus had built. Outside, the city was waking up. In conference room A, Roberto was preparing to testify about technical specifications he'd verified 18 months ago based on notes his mother had taken while serving coffee. And in this office, Marcus had to decide whether to trust the man who had betrayed him with the salvation of everything he'd worked to create. The irony wasn't lost on him. The people he'd overlooked, Maria and Roberto, had risked everything to save him. The person he'd trusted most, Stephen, had been working to destroy him. But now Stephen was offering redemption, both for himself and for Technova. Marcus reached for the tablet. "Show me everything," he said. At 5:43 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the conference room windows, Marcus sat at the head of the table surrounded by the most unlikely team of people who had ever tried to save a billion-dollar corporation. To his left sat Maria, still in her simple sweater but now holding a folder of legal documents. To his right sat Roberto, exhausted but determined, with his technical certifications spread before him. Across the table, Patricia and her legal team flanked Stephen Walsh, who looked like a man preparing for his own execution. The Europeans were connecting to the video call in 7 minutes. "Everyone understands the plan?" Marcus asked. Patricia nodded grimly. "Roberto provides technical verification of the original specifications based on his consultation with Maria 18 months ago. If they try to introduce new complications, Stephen presents the evidence of sabotage and conspiracy." "And then?" asked Roberto. "And then we find out if the truth is enough to save us," Marcus replied. The large monitor at the end of the room flickered to life, showing 5 Europeans in what appeared to be a conference room in London. Marcus recognized Dr. Heinrich Müller, the lead negotiator, and Isabelle Dubois, the technical director. "Good morning," Dr. Müller said formally. "We understand you wish to provide technical verification of your original contract specifications." "That's correct," Marcus responded. "I'd like to introduce Roberto Santos, a certified technical consultant who provided verification of these specifications 18 months ago." Dr. Müller frowned. "Mr. Chen, we were expecting testimony from someone who was actually present at the original negotiations. Roberto's mother, Maria Santos, was present at the meeting. Roberto provided immediate technical consultation when she documented the specifications that were discussed." "This is highly irregular," said Isabelle Dubois. "We need verification from someone with direct knowledge of the negotiation process." Marcus felt his heart sink. They were going to reject Roberto's testimony just as they'd rejected every other solution. But Roberto leaned forward confidently. "Ms. Dubois, with respect, I have direct knowledge of every technical specification that was promised during that negotiation. I can provide detailed analysis of server architecture, security protocols, data redundancy systems, and performance benchmarks. Would you like me to begin?" For the next 20 minutes, Roberto demonstrated a mastery of technical details that impressed even David Kim. He walked through each specification Maria had documented, provided the mathematical calculations that supported Technova's current system capabilities, and answered every technical question the Europeans posed. "This is quite impressive," Dr. Müller admitted. "Your system appears to exceed the promised specifications in most categories." Marcus felt a surge of hope. They were so close. But then Isabelle Dubois smiled coldly. "However, there's one additional requirement that we must address." Patricia tensed beside Marcus. This was what Stephen had warned them about. "During our review of the contract documentation," Dubois continued, "we discovered that Technova agreed to provide quarterly financial audits demonstrating corporate stability throughout the contract period. According to our records, these audits were never provided." Marcus stared at the screen. "I have no record of agreeing to quarterly financial audits. The requirement is clearly documented in Amendment 7B, which was added during the contract revision process 18 months ago." Patricia was frantically searching through her papers. "We have no record of Amendment 7B. "That's unfortunate," Dr. Müller said. "Without these audits, we cannot proceed with the contract regardless of technical verification." Marcus felt the walls closing in again. Another impossible requirement that he'd never agreed to, with documentation he'd never seen. But Stephen Walsh cleared his throat and leaned toward the camera. "Dr. Müller, this is Stephen Walsh, Technova's Chief Financial Officer. I need to inform you that Amendment 7B is fraudulent." The Europeans looked confused. "Fraudulent how?" Stephen opened his tablet and began to read. Amendment 7B was created and inserted into your contract documentation by representatives of a conspiracy involving Meridian Technologies, Apex Systems, and Global Tech Solutions. The amendment was designed to create impossible compliance requirements that would force Technova into bankruptcy, allowing these companies to acquire our technology and client base at a discount. The conference room fell completely silent. Even the Europeans looked stunned. Mr. Walsh, Dr. Mueller said slowly, are you alleging that we are part of this conspiracy? No. You are victims of this conspiracy, just as Technova is. You've been manipulated into believing that Technova has failed to meet legitimate contract requirements, when in fact the requirements themselves are fabricated. Stephen turned his tablet toward the camera. I have complete documentation of this conspiracy, including financial records, email communications, and recorded conversations. I also have the original unaltered contract documents that show Technova has not only met all legitimate requirements, but has exceeded them. Isabelle Dubois was furious. Mr. Walsh, if what you're saying is true, this represents massive fraud perpetrated against the European Union's business development programs. It is true, and I know it's true because I was part of the conspiracy. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Dr. Mueller recovered first. Mr. Walsh, are you confessing to deliberately sabotaging this contract? I am. I'm also providing complete evidence to correct that sabotage and restore the contract to its original legitimate terms. For the next hour, Stephen methodically presented evidence that dismantled the entire conspiracy. He showed altered contract documents, financial transfers, email chains plotting Technova's destruction, and recorded conversations with representatives from the three competing companies. With each piece of evidence, the Europeans grew more outraged, not at Technova but at the fraud that had been perpetrated against them. This is extraordinary, Dr. Mueller said finally. Mr. Chen, it appears that your company has been the victim of an elaborate conspiracy, and we have been unwitting participants in that conspiracy. What does this mean for the contract? Marcus asked. It means, said Isabelle Dubois, that based on the technical verification provided by Mr. Santos and the evidence of fraud provided by Mr. Walsh, we are prepared to reinstate the original contract immediately. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. Immediately. The contract is valid, Mr. Chen. You have not only met your obligations, you have exceeded them despite deliberate sabotage. We will issue a formal statement within the hour confirming the contract's validity and our satisfaction with Technova's deliverables. As the Europeans ended the call, the conference room erupted in celebration. Lawyers who had been working for 18 straight hours were crying with relief. David Kim was hugging his laptop. Patricia was already on the phone with the stock exchange, preparing to halt trading until the announcement could be made public. But Marcus walked over to where Maria sat quietly with Roberto. I don't know how to thank you, he said simply. Maria smiled. You don't need to thank us, Mr. Chen. You need to remember us. What do you mean? Roberto answered for his mother. She means remember that the people who care about you aren't always the ones in expensive suits. Sometimes they're the ones who notice when translations are wrong, or when someone needs coffee during a long meeting, or when a little girl needs someone to help with her homework. Marcus knelt down beside Emma, who had slept through most of the night's drama and was just now waking up. Good morning, sweetheart. Did Maria save your job, Daddy? Marcus looked at Maria, then at Roberto, then at Stephen, who was quietly packing up his evidence while preparing to turn himself into the authorities. Maria and Roberto saved much more than my job, Emma. They saved our company. They saved a lot of people's jobs. And they taught me something very important about paying attention to the right people. What are you going to do now? Emma asked. Marcus thought about the question. Technova was saved. The contract was secure, the stock price would recover. But the real question was what he would do with the second chance he'd been given. Now I'm going to take you and Maria out for the best breakfast in New York City. And then I'm going to ask Maria if she'd be interested in a different kind of job. What kind of job? Marcus looked at Maria. How would you feel about being Technova's Director of Cultural Integration? Your job would be to help me remember that businesses are built by people, not just by technology and contracts and legal documents. Maria's eyes widened. Mr. Chen, I don't have a college degree. I don't know business words. You know people words. You know how to listen. You know how to notice when something is wrong and speak up about it, even when it's scary. Those are the most important qualifications for the job I'm offering. Roberto grinned. Mom, say yes. A company that values what you bring to the table is a company worth working for. As they walked out of the conference room together, Marcus carrying his sleeping daughter, Maria walking beside them, Roberto following with a folder full of technical certifications that had saved a billion-dollar corporation, Marcus realized that the most important thing he'd learned wasn't about business or contracts or legal strategies. He'd learned that the people who matter most are often the ones who ask for the least. The people who see the most are often the ones who say the least. And sometimes, the biggest crises in life aren't meant to destroy you. They're meant to wake you up to what you've been missing. 6 months later, Teknova's stock price had reached an all-time high. Stephen Walsh was serving a reduced sentence in federal prison in exchange for his cooperation in prosecuting the conspiracy. Roberto had been hired as a full-time security consultant and was finishing his engineering degree on Teknova's scholarship program. And Maria Santos, Director of Cultural Integration, had an office 3 doors down from the CEO, where she continued to notice things that others missed and to speak up when something needed to be said. But the most important change was that Marcus Chen made it home for dinner 4 nights a week, helped Emma with her homework, and never again forgot to ask about the lives of the people who made his life possible. If you want to keep hearing incredible stories like this one, tap the red subscribe button. It's free and it helps me share more amazing tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.